Hey everybody, we are going to talk about the male reproductive system today. And we got some big jobs, the male repro system here, including production of gametes. And of course, remember that gametes are sex cells. So those are going to be sperm cells for boys and then ova for ladies. We are also making androgens, which are male sex hormones. So male sex hormones, there are a variety of androgens, but the one we're going to talk about in particular is testosterone. Andro means man, gen means maker, so literally androgens are man makers. And finally, of course, delivery of sperm into the female repro tract, putting the sperm in proximity to the eggs so that zygote formation can occur and babies can get made. All right, so those are our big functions. As far as organs we're going to go over, there are two male external genital structures we're going to hit, the penis and the scrotum. Then we'll also knock out the testes, the epididymides, the ductus deferens, the seminal vesicles, the prostate, the bulbourethral glands, and the urethra. So those are our internal genital structures. Let's take a look at the scrotum first of all. Scrotum is a pouch of skin, superficial fascia, housing the male gonads. A gonad, of course, is a primary sex organ. So it's the organ that's going to be making the gametes. And the gonad for the male is the testes. The gonad for the female is the ovary. Now, obviously, the scrotum is not a very well protected place. I mean, there's not a lot of muscle in there. There's not any bone in there. So what's the value of putting the testes in this vulnerable location? And the idea is that the temperature is slightly lower. And that slightly lower temperature is going to enhance sperm production. Okay. So this is a vervet monkey. Notice it has a very bright blue scrotum. So there are there are mammals out there that use their scrotum as a way to attract mates. All right, that's definitely not a function of the human scrotum. So let's not discuss it anymore. Not all mammals have internal scrotum, internal testes. So like, for example, aquatic mammals like dolphins, like narwhals, they have an internal scrotum. Not an internal scrotum, they have internal testes, because having a scrotum would create drag and make it harder for them to be good streamlined swimmers. Okay, there is an important muscle that comes down into the scrotum and sort of encircles the testes. This muscle is called the cremaster muscle. It comes off the internal oblique muscle, comes down. We see it coming down here, and it kind of like loops around the testes. The cremaster muscle is going to contract when temperature drops. So this guy here is jumping into some very cold water. That's going to cause his scrotal temperature to decrease. In response, the cremaster muscle contracts. That causes a slight elevation of the testes within the scrotum, prevents them from getting too cold. Now, there's actually a way to test this reflex. If a clinician, using either their finger or like the handle of the reflex hammer, like does a downward stroke on the inside of the thigh here, it'll cause a ipsilateral elevation of the testes. So the testes will actually, on that same side, will actually go up a little bit in the scrotum. That's called the cremaster reflex. Okay, there's another muscle. It's called the dartos muscle. It's kind of like more within the, like right next to the dermis of the testes. And in response to a drop in temperature, the dartos muscle contracts. That tightens the scrotal skin. That's going to decrease the scrotal surface area And with less surface area, you're not going to lose as much heat. So the dartos and the cremaster muscle are both utilized to prevent the testes from getting too cold. But of course, they would also relax if the testes is getting too warm. Like if the cremaster muscle relaxes, where's the cremaster muscle? There is. If it relaxes, the testes is going to drop slightly in the scrotum, and that's going to help keep it a little bit cooler. Similarly, if the dartos relaxes, the scrotal skin will get a little bit baggier, and that'll give it more surface area, and that'll let it radiate heat away a little bit better. Okay, so there are a couple coverings on the testes. So the testes itself, so this is the internal testes right here. And it's got a connective tissue layer, which is this guy right here. It's called the tunica albuginea, which means white coat. So that is the connective tissue capsule of the testes, and you can see some septa coming in as well. Around the tunica albuginea are two layers that are basically like the peritoneum of the testes. And there's two layers. They're called the tunica vaginalis. The word vaginalis means sheath. So they ensheath, they cover the testes. You might wonder, like, why does the testes have a, two-layered peritoneum? It's got parietal and visceral. Well, the testes started development in the abdominal cavity up near the kidney, and as it drops into the scrotum, it drags the perineum with it. Okay, so we got our tunica albuginea of our testes. We see its connective tissue partitions coming inward, and that creates lobules within the testes. And the lobules are going to contain these coiled tubes, which are called seminiferous tubules. Seminiferous tubules, as we'll discuss, are the sites of sperm production. And then in between seminiferous tubules, I've got a bunch of seminiferous tubules here, but in between them, I've got interstitial cells. Interstitial cells make testosterone. Okay, so we're looking at a testes here. It's been cut open. We do see the internal stuff here. This is the connective tissue capsule, the tunica albuginea, and we see the two peritoneal layers as well, which are the tunica vaginalis. And then remember, the tunica albuginea is going to have these connective tissue septa going in, dividing the testes up into lobules, and in the lobules we find these seminiferous tubules, and seminiferous tubules are the sites of sperm production. There's the sperm factories. Now, behind the testes is this coiled structure called the epididymis. And notice the epididymis is connected to the seminiferous tubules. So sperm that are made in the seminiferous tubules get pushed by testicular fluid into the epididymides, and that is where sperm are going to be stored and where they're going to mature. So sperm storage and maturage happens in here. And part of that maturation process is they learn how to properly swim. Okay, so here I've got some penguins, of course. And penguins have a challenge in that they are always walking on, cold snow and ice, and they don't want to lose too much heat in their feet. And what penguins are going to do is the artery going to the feet is wrapped up by veins coming from the feet. So before the warm blood gets to the feet, the warmth, the heat in this blood is stolen by the blood in the veins coming back from the feet. And that way, a lot of heat doesn't end up going to the feet, and the penguin feet stay kind of cold, which is okay because then they don't lose heat. Similar situation is going to happen in the testes. The artery is bringing warm blood to the testes, and the artery is going to be wrapped up by the vein. You can see the artery branches in here are enclosed by this net of vein here. And what's going to happen is the heat in the artery is stolen by the blood in the vein. And that prevents that heat from getting to the testes, or too much heat at least, which is going to prevent the testes from getting too warm. And this is called countercurrent exchange, because we got blood going this way in the artery, blood going that way in the vein, and heat is being exchanged between them. So we do see the branches of the testicular artery in here. And we also see the network of branches of the testicular vein. And this net in here of the testicular vein is known as the pampiniform plexus, which basically means the net that looks like a net. Okay, let's talk about the spermatic cords. So we covered the seminiferous tubules. They're connected to the epididymides. Each epididymis eventually turns into a vas deferens. And the vas deferens, plus the blood vessels coming to and from the testes, plus nerves and lymphatic vessels, all of that is wrapped in connective tissue. And it's got the cremaster muscle in it too. And that ultimately is known as the spermatic cord. Now, the spermatic cord is going to come up from the testes. This is all the stuff in the spermatic cord. And it actually has to go through the abdominal wall. And so there's a passageway in the abdominal wall. And that passageway is called the inguinal canal. That way the blood vessels can get into the torso. Sometimes that inguinal canal can get a little bit too big, and loops of the small intestine can bulge through it. That's called an inguinal hernia. Not a good thing. All right, let's talk about the penis, which of course is a urinary organ because it's carrying the urethra, which is connected to the urinary bladder. It's also an organ for copulation, for sexual intercourse, for erection, and for ejaculation. So the penis, and this is a circumcised penis here, has a couple different structures. It has the expanded tip, which is the glands. The word glands means acorn, literally. And then there's the body of the penis, also called the shaft of the penis. And then there's the root of the penis, which has a few different structures in it. The body of the penis contains 3 erectile tissues. There are 2 of them that are known as the corpora cavernosa, and then there is one known as the corpus spongiosum. And those are erectile tissues, which obviously are going to be involved in producing an erection. More on them in a moment. If we slice the penis transversely, we can see the 3 erectile tissues. This is a corpus cavernosa on one side, corpus cavernosa on the other, and the corpus spongiosum on the ventral side, smaller, and it has the urethra, and the part of the urethra in there is called the spongy urethra. Here is a real penis that has been dissected. These are the corpora cavernosa. This is the corpus spongiosum, and that is the spongy or penile urethra. Okay. Coming back to the scrotum, kind of like jumping around a little bit. I know. We've got the epididymides here. We've got one epididymis here. The 2 are called the epididymides. And the epididymis becomes the vas deferens, which is also known as the ductus deferens, which is going to take sperm and testicular fluid up out of the testes. We see the vas deferens coming up here, going through the inguinal canal, going over the urinary bladder, passing the ureter. Right here, the vas deferens gets wide, and that's called the ampulla of the vas deferens. And that ampulla of the vas deferens is going to connect with this guy here. This is a seminal vesicle. Now, in this situation, the vas deferens has been cut and sealed off, And of course, this is what happens in a vasectomy. So sperm are still made, they still go to the epididymis for maturation, but now they cannot be ejaculated away. Instead, the epididymis will just phagocytose them, chop them up, recycle, and reuse all the parts. Another type of contraception is this stuff called vasogel, which is going to be injected into the lumen of the vas deferens. And it's like this barrier, this gel barrier that the sperm can't get through. So this is it's kind of like a vasectomy in that we're blocking the vas deferens, but we're not doing it permanently. Kind of interesting. This is the histology of the of the epididymis, and we've got the nice tube here with the lumen, and these are all stored sperm cells in here. These are stored sperm cells, and they're probably in the process of maturing. Here we got the histology of the ductus deferens. It's got a lumen for sperm and testicular fluid transport, as well as a bunch of smooth muscle for the peristalsis. It's going to move that sperm and testicular fluid during ejaculation. So, mentioned them earlier, there's a seminal vesicle right here on the back of the urinary bladder. We've actually got a pair of seminal vesicles. The seminal vesicles are going to fuse with the ampulla of the ductus deferens, and when those two fuse, we get a tube which runs diagonally through the prostate gland and is called the ejaculatory duct. Now, the seminal vesicle makes seminal fluid, which ends up being about 60% of semen volume. It's got fructose, which is a sugar, which is a nutrient source for the sperm cells. It has prostaglandins, which can affect the smooth muscle activity of the vagina and the uterus. It also has a coagulating enzyme, which is going to thicken thicken the semen to allow it to be ejaculated farther, closer towards the cervix and cervical canal. All right, onto the urinary bladder is the prostate gland. We got the prostatic urethra going through it, and we're going to have a pair of ejaculatory ducts. Remember, the ejaculatory duct was formed from the seminal vesicle and the ampulla of the vas deferens. So here is a slice of a prostate gland. We got the prostatic urethra in the middle of it, two ejaculatory ducts here. Each ejaculatory duct is made from a seminal vesicle, as well as an ampulla of a vas deferens. There's also a lot of little ducts within the prostate gland. All these little small ducts are going to carry prostatic fluid, which is going to empty into the prostatic urethra. And that prostatic fluid makes up about 30% of semen volume. It has another nutrient source called citrate. It also contains something called prostate-specific antigen, which is going to help thin the semen post-ejaculation to make it easier for the sperm to swim away and swim their way up into the female repro tract. All right, let's review the urethra. We covered this in the urinary system, but of course there is a prostatic urethra in the prostate gland, a membranous urethra in the urogenital diaphragm, and then a penile or spongy urethra in the corpus spongiosum of the penis. Of course, there's an opening on each end for the urethra. They are the external and the internal urethral orifices. Now, we also have a gland called the bulbourethral gland. It's paired. Notice the bulbourethral gland is near the bulb of the penis. It's kind of in the urogenital diaphragm. It secretes a basic mucus post-erection. So post-erection, the body is assuming ejaculation is going to happen. So this basic mucus is secreted to flush and lubricate the urethra. Now the danger is, it is theoretically possible that on a previous ejaculation, some sperm cells took a wrong turn, and then they get released during the bulbourethral mucus secretion. that occurs later on in another erection. Okay, let's talk about semen composition a bit. About 10% testicular fluid, which is where the sperm are, about 60% seminal fluid from the seminal vesicles, about 30% prostatic fluid from the prostate gland. The fluids are going to help protect, activate, and transport the sperm cell. Okay, how does an erection happen? Well, we're going to start with some sort of sexual arousal. With sexual arousal, whether that's, in the brain, visual, mechanical stimulation of the penis, whatever it might be. And that's going to cause parasympathetic signals to go to the arterioles in the penis. Acetylcholine is going to be released from those neurons onto penile arteriole smooth muscle. The smooth muscle cells are going to make a gas called nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator. Penile arterioles vasodilate. That actually also results in the compression of neighboring penile venules. So this makes it very easy for blood to flow in and challenging for blood to flow out. So the erectile tissues, the corpora cavernosa and the corpus spongiosum, become engorged with blood, and that, of course, is an erection. So here we see the two corpora cavernosa, and we see a corpus spongiosum right here. Okay, what about ejaculation physiology? So let's assume that those sexual stimuli reach a certain threshold level. At that point, there's going to be an increase in sympathetic signals to the penis. So sympathetic neurons to the penis. And a bunch of things are going to happen. So your internal urethral sphincter is going to close tight. That's going to stop any semen refluxing up into the urinary bladder or any urine being released with the semen. Those sympathetic signals also act on all the reproductive glands and ducts. So we're talking about the epididymides, the vas deferences, the seminal vesicles, and the prostate gland, all secreting their fluids, and the smooth muscle within those fluids are going to contract, as well as contraction of smooth muscle inside the penis, which is going to propel the semen, and that, of course, is ejaculation. All right, and with that, we now need to talk about how sperm are made. And we got to realize, of course, that sperm cells, and egg cells are going to be haploid, which means they have half the chromosome content of a normal body cell. So normal body cells, whether they're muscle cells, skin cells, bone cells, etc., are said to be diploid, meaning they have 2 copies of every chromosome. Sperm cells and egg cells are haploid, meaning they have 1 copy of every chromosome. So diploid cells have pairs of chromosomes, all your body cells, 2 sets of each chromosomes. Haploid cells do not have pairs, only 1 set of chromosomes, and these are the sex cells. And of course, when a sperm and an egg combine, we get a zygote, which is a diploid cell. Just got to make sure we know these definitions, okay? Now, when we first make a zygote, the zygote will divide by mitosis to make all of the different various body cells. So skin cells, muscle cells, nerve cells, bone cells, etc. Also, in the process of mitosis, we make these cells called spermatogonia, and they're diploid. And around the time of puberty, spermatogonia start undergoing a process called spermatogenesis, where they turn into haploid sperm. And this process is going to occur basically from puberty until death. And spermatogenesis is sperm formation. And there's actually 2 parts to it. There's meiosis, and then there's spermiogenesis. So meiosis and spermiogenesis. And spermatogenesis happens in the seminiferous tubules of the testes. That's where it takes place. So let's start by looking at a seminiferous tubule right here. There's one right there. We got a lot of them here. These cells in here are in the process of spermatogenesis. So these are spermatogenic cells here. They're in the process of doing spermatogenesis. And as we're going to see, spermatogenesis occurs from outside in. So our formed sperm cells end up in the lumen of the tube. And I think we're going to break this repro lecture up into two parts. We'll call this part one. We'll end that right here. We'll pick up again next time right here. Whoops. How many slides do I have? I'm on slide 4. We'll have a kind of a short lecture next time. But yeah, I'll see you then. Bye.